At exactly 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time, October 7, 2025, in the marble-walled Hart Senate office building, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana leaned into his microphone. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the kind of tone that veteran Washington observers knew meant someone was about to get destroyed. "Attorney General Bondi," he drawled in that unmistakable Louisiana accent, "are you going to hold a separate hearing on your whistleblower account of the FBI investigation of 8 United States senators? John Kennedy clashes with Pam Bondi in fiery Senate hearing over DOJ spying allegations. Because 24 hours earlier, the world had learned that the FBI under the previous administration had secretly obtained phone records of 8 sitting Republican senators. Not just any senators. Senators who had supported Donald Trump. Senators who had questioned the 2020 election. Senators who were now sitting in this very room, demanding answers. The question seemed innocent enough. But in the packed Senate Judiciary Committee room, everyone knew this was the moment the hearing had been building toward. This was the moment Pam Bondi would have to answer for one of the most explosive political scandals in modern American history. And Pam Bondi, Trump's hand-picked attorney general, was about to face the most dangerous questioning of her career. Then, the night before, Chairman Chuck Grassley dropped a bombshell. The October 7th hearing had been scheduled as routine oversight. Just another day of congressional theater, where Republicans would praise Bondi and Democrats would attack her. Standard Washington kabuki. The operation had a code name: Arctic Frost. The senators weren't just any lawmakers. They were Josh Hawley of Missouri, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, all members of the very committee that would be questioning Bondi. All allies of Trump. All people who had challenged the 2020 election results. In a late-night press release, the Iowa Republican revealed a classified FBI document from September. The document showed that Special Counsel Jack Smith's team had obtained toll records, detailed phone data, showing who called whom, when, and for how long for 8 Republican senators and 1 House member. Now she would have to explain how the Justice Department she inherited had allegedly spied on sitting members of Congress. And in the middle of it all sat Pam Bondi, the 59-year-old former Florida Attorney General who had promised to end the weaponization of justice when she took office 8 months earlier. By 6 a.m. on October 7th, conservative media was in full meltdown mode. Fox News was calling it the biggest political scandal since Watergate. Talk radio hosts were screaming about a deep state coup. Social media was exploding with hashtags like Spygate and Arctic Frost. Kennedy's question hung in the air, like a loaded gun. Around the committee table, Republican senators leaned forward. In the gallery, reporters stopped typing. Even the Capitol police officers standing guard seemed to stiffen. Bondi's response was careful, measured, the kind of answer that said everything and nothing. "I think we need to wait until we see what the FBI can report and whether it's necessary to have a hearing right now," she said. "Mr. Chairman," Kennedy continued, "if I can answer it, yes, go ahead." Kennedy wasn't satisfied. The Louisiana senator had built his reputation on folksy questions that trapped witnesses in their own words. He was just getting started. The repetition was deliberate. Kennedy was forcing Bondi to give a direct answer. In the world of congressional hearings, repetition means blood in the water. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to hold a separate hearing on your whistleblower account of the FBI investigation of 8 United States senators?" But Bondi had been through this before. As Florida's Attorney General for 8 years, as a member of Trump's impeachment defense team, as a witness in countless depositions, she knew how to deflect. "It's been 24 hours since the FBI investigation on it," she replied. "Please give me an opportunity to sort through all this." The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but in those 120 seconds, Kennedy had accomplished something remarkable. He had forced the nation's top law enforcement officer to admit that she didn't have answers about one of the most serious constitutional violations in modern history. "Fair enough," Kennedy said, but his tone suggested it wasn't fair at all. "I just don't want to wait 24 years to get an answer." 20 minutes later, Kennedy shifted gears. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different weight, the kind of gravity reserved for the most sensitive subjects in Washington, and he was just warming up. But Kennedy was walking straight into that minefield. "Attorney General Bondi," he began, I want to ask you about Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's comments calling Epstein the greatest blackmailer ever in an interview with the New York Post last week. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex trafficker who had died in federal custody while awaiting trial, remained one of the most radioactive names in American politics. His connections to powerful figures across both parties had made any discussion of his case a political minefield. Has the Justice Department interviewed Mr. Lutnick about his experiences with the disgraced financier? For the first time, all day, Bondi looked genuinely uncomfortable. She shifted in her chair, glanced down at her notes, then back up at Kennedy. No one has, she admitted. Maybe we ought to get Mr. Lutnick in here too, Mr. Chairman, Kennedy replied. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the smile of a prosecutor who had just gotten the confession he wanted. If Howard Lutnick wants to speak to the FBI and if Director Patel wants to speak to Howard Lutnick, absolutely, Bondi added quickly, trying to recover. With that single line, Kennedy had just made Howard Lutnick, one of Trump's most powerful cabinet members, the subject of a potential congressional investigation. All because of a casual comment in a newspaper interview. The political implications were staggering. Lutnick wasn't just Commerce Secretary. He was one of Trump's closest advisors, a billionaire Wall Street executive, who had helped finance the 2024 campaign. And now, thanks to Kennedy's questioning, he was potentially the next witness in the Epstein investigation. If the 8 senators who were spied upon sue the hell out of the Department of Justice and the perpetrators involved, will that facilitate their investigation and/or yours? The question was loaded with constitutional dynamite. Kennedy was suggesting that sitting senators might sue the federal government over violations of their constitutional rights. He was talking about a separation of powers crisis that could reach the Supreme Court. But Kennedy wasn't done. As the hearing continued, he circled back to the phone record scandal with the persistence of a Louisiana alligator. Breathtaking. That was the word that would dominate the news cycle. Not concerning or troubling. Breathtaking. I guess what I'm getting to, Kennedy continued, is I don't understand why we don't have a separate hearing. I find this breathtaking. Bondi tried to deflect again. We do have an active investigation going on through my staff. I want to make that very clear. This was about whether the American justice system could police itself. But Kennedy had already moved on to his next target. Because this wasn't just about phone records, or Epstein files or congressional hearings. This was about something much bigger. On the other side, she had a Justice Department that she claimed to have reformed, but which was still run by many of the same career officials who had authorized the surveillance in the first place. On one side, she had Republican senators demanding accountability for what they saw as an unprecedented violation of congressional privilege. The phone record scandal touched on one of the most sacred principles in American government, the separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches. What Kennedy understood, and what made his questioning so devastating, was that Bondi was caught between 2 impossible positions. I think we need to know exactly who approved the wiretaps on United States senators. Senator Josh Hawley had said earlier in the hearing. Who knew about it? What agents were involved at DOJ or the FBI? I think we need to know exactly who signed off on the Catholic memo and the spying memo. Who was involved with it? How far did it go? Kennedy's genius was in forcing Bondi to choose. Either she would aggressively investigate her own department and risk alienating the career staff she needed to run the DOJ, or she would protect those officials and risk being seen as part of the cover-up. There was no good answer, and Kennedy knew it. Those weren't just rhetorical questions. They were a roadmap for a potential criminal investigation that could reach the highest levels of the previous administration. But if she pursued it too aggressively, she would face accusations of political retaliation from Democrats and career DOJ officials. And if Bondi didn't pursue that investigation aggressively enough, she would face the wrath of Trump, the Republican Senate, and conservative media. Kennedy had laid out the trap perfectly. As the hearing continued into its 4th hour, the pattern became clear. Kennedy's questioning had set the tone for the entire Republican strategy. One by one, his GOP colleagues piled on, demanding answers about the phone records, the Epstein files, the firing of career prosecutors. Can you tell me why my phone records were sought by the Jack Smith agents? He demanded. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the senators whose phone records had been obtained, was particularly brutal. Senator Marsha Blackburn, another target of the surveillance, called it an outrage, an unconstitutional breach. Senator Josh Hawley went further, claiming that the FBI had tapped my phone, a characterization that would later be fact-checked as misleading, but which dominated conservative media coverage. The Democrats tried to fight back, but they were playing defense. Senator Dick Durbin accused Bondi of transforming the Justice Department and leaving an enormous stain on American history. Senator Mausi Hirano declared that what was once the Department of Justice has become the Department of Revenge and Corruption. But their attacks only reinforced the Republican narrative that Bondi was under siege from the same forces that had allegedly spied on Republican senators. The real genius of Kennedy's approach was that he understood the stakes better than anyone else in the room. By the time the hearing ended at 6:15 p.m., Kennedy had accomplished something remarkable without raising his voice, without personal attacks, without theatrical grandstanding. He had turned a routine oversight hearing into a constitutional crisis. This wasn't really about phone records or Epstein files or even Pam Bondi. This was about whether the American people could trust their government. For Democrats, Kennedy's questioning represented a dangerous escalation in the war over democratic norms. By treating routine investigative tools as constitutional violations, Republicans were making it impossible for law enforcement to do its job. For Republicans, the Arctic frost scandal was proof of everything they had been saying about the deep state for years. Here was documentary evidence that federal law enforcement had surveilled sitting members of Congress, the people's representatives, for having the wrong political opinions.